Hi.
Hi, everybody. Very impressed that everyone's here on time. Hi, Sherry.
Hello.
And for some reason, hold on. Oh, there we go. How is everyone? Bless you, Alyssa. And I think David's joining us, right, Susie? Susie is.
I believe so.
There he is. Here he is. Okay, awesome. Awesome. So impressed. Everybody on time. And Alyssa, thanks for making time during the workday. Glad that worked out. Hi, David. Hi, everybody.
Susie, how are you feeling? How's your arm? Shoulder?
I'm pretty sore, but the surgeon is very pleased with his handiwork. So
Right.
according to him, I will be able to hold the baby in October, God willing. So
Amazing.
I've got the prize in sight. So I'll getting through it day by day.
Good.
Thanks for asking.
Great. I was going to do our first go around of just refuah shlema to Susie, but thanks, Sydney, for jumping in. So Jennifer's freezing and David's switching audio. All right, we will manage. So welcome, everybody. And Sherry, are you healthy?
I finally tested negative last night, thankfully, and I have no symptoms left. So it was a really, it wasn't as horrible as it could have been, thankfully, but it did take me out for a couple of days, and I just, I've got plenty of sick time at work, so I was able to just take 2 days off of work and recover over the weekend, and spent most of the time just in bed.
Gotcha. Well,
So-
sorry to hear that happened again, and glad that you're with us and here.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so we're waiting for Jennifer to come back on. And David, are you set now with the audio?
Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Great.
I can hear you.
My
I'm
phone
just
is
stuck.
better than Drew.
Right, and Jennifer, are you with us?
She said she's freezing and she's going to move rooms. She'll be right back.
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm just moving rooms with my laptop.
Okay, great. All right, so we are going to get started. I appreciate that everyone made time in the middle of the day like this, and certainly for Sherry, the earlier part of the middle of the day, and we'll get at it. So believe it or not, the course ends on Friday officially. And yeah, believe it or not, crazy. It's been, I'll just say to start, really, it's been such a pleasure. Obviously, it was great to be together in person. And David, actually, I just asked Debbie to deal with downloading all the videos. And I forgot to remind her that when I met with her earlier today, but I'll try to remind her again. But we'll certainly get you those so you can catch up as need be. And obviously for anybody else as well, we'll have the videos of the sessions we did. So we'll get right to it though, to hear your thoughts about the final project. And this is how we're going to do it. Certainly don't expect anyone to have a full-blown every piece worked out already. And I know some of you posted, I didn't check again early this morning, so I haven't, if you posted late last night or this morning, I haven't seen it yet. But the idea is you'll share what you have, and maximum you're going to share for 3 minutes. So what you have may be, here's the artifact I think I'm going to use, or I'm definitely doing it for my position at my synagogue, and this is their mission statement, and this is what I'm challenged by with it. So whatever it is you have, that's what you're going to share. You get 3 minutes to do that. Then we'll have a round of clarifying questions, just so that everybody can understand the specifics. And then we'll have a round of probing questions, which means you're going to ask like deeper in about, hold on a second, my son is here with his dog. Let me just tell them to be a little, guys, Abe, okay, all right. All right, hi, I'm sorry about that. Okay, so then we'll have a round of probing questions, which would be things like, you want to bring the Palestinian flag to your conservative synagogue. You think that's really a good idea or something like that. Okay, a probing question. But really just to get more information. And then like, if that was the question, like an answer could be, yes, I have a committee that really wants to share about the Palestinians in my committee, in the synagogue. So just that kind of stuff. And then we're going to do a consultancy round where the person who presents turns their camera off and the rest of us talk as if the person isn't there with our ideas, our thoughts, any suggestions, etc. And when after that round, the person brings their camera back on and they don't have to say anything. They can just say, thanks, I heard everything you said, got it. Or can say, oh yeah, I really like the idea that you posed of blah, blah, blah. I'd like to do that. Okay, so everyone get what we're doing. I think I don't know if I don't think I've done this in this class with you all, but I know I've done this with some of you in other settings, and I'm sure Susie's done this with some of you in other settings as well. Okay, everyone get it? And I'm going to keep a timer so that we can get through everybody we will end absolutely by 4:30 Eastern time. Okay, everybody good? All right, do we have any volunteers to go first?
I'm happy to.
Yay, David. All
Um,
right, so I'm setting the timer for 3
So-
minutes for your presentation. Yeah.
Sure. So the source that I'm using is from an organization called Beit Tefillah Israeli. Their kind of brief in general is Judaism in the public sphere in a non-coercive way. You may, like, the thing that they're most famous for is the big Kabbalah Shabbats at the mall, at the port in Tel Aviv. And they've, for the last few years, at least 10 years, have put together a program that's a Havdalah between Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. My intended kind of target audience and like thinking about a program around this primary source is young adults. It's actually a program I've run before in the past and has not been successful. I'm looking to in the idea of like building a connection with Israel and a living connection with Israel and like fostering kind of an appreciation and understanding of Israeli culture and cultural identity. I had in the past tried to run this program as like, let's do this program, and it didn't really catch. And I'd love to run this program. It's like a hybrid, let's do this program and let's learn about this program. And I think I want to just do like a preparatory experience for young adults that would be diving into some of the texts and cultural context that goes into this program, leading up to a communal or like shared or like participating in Beit Tefillah Israeli's experience, because they've posted online the past couple of years too.
Great, thank you, David. So let's do a round of clarifying questions. That's, questions of just things you might not have understood, not interpretive questions, but just content clarifying.
Can I ask a clarifying question with a clarifying question? Am I like answering them, or are we just collecting all of them and then I'm like, what am I doing with this?
Great question. Yes, you are. I'll be the determinant if it belongs in the clarifying question category or not, and if it is, you will answer it. Okay.
Great.
All right. So, friends, whoever's ready to go with a clarifying question, if there are any, if there aren't, we'll move on. Everybody understand what David's trying to do, thinking about doing?
I have to be frank. It was very hard to understand. Like, just the audio is not great. I tried and I kept listening and I didn't want to cut you off, but it was kind of hard to hear.
No, it's fine. Is it any better now, or like, should I swap? So background, I'm in the Prima Royale in Jerusalem. So like Jerusalem hotel internet, not good. So I'm trying to use my phone. It may be my headset. Let me take it off real quick and see what happens.
But also,
Right.
if you talk slower, if you
Wait,
could
he
please-
can't hear you, Sherry, because he's got his.
Oh,
And
okay.
I did type in Beit Tefillah Israeli in the chat because I knew it was hard to hear what he was talking about, but
Yeah.
I get it.
Are we better now?
A little better. David, can you speak slowly and a little louder?
Sure. Absolutely. So I can do my spiel again in the Kitzer short version. So this program is based around a Havdalah that Beit Tefillah Israeli has made between Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. It's a program they've run for about 10 years. And I've tried this program in the past in trying to bring it to young adults of like, this is a really interesting and unique Israeli experience that shines a light on a really pivotal part of what I see as like Israeli identity and something that's useful in understanding it. And my educational program that I'd like to run is a preparatory kind of 4-part series leading up to it that will involve diving into some of these texts and some of like the context that goes along with them to allow Americans to walk into this like very uniquely Israeli space, I think, and have a cultural context and understanding. So it's less of a like show that they're watching and more of an experience that they can kind of connect in defining their own relationship to Israel that they wouldn't do otherwise.
Okay, great. Thank you,
Better?
David. I think that was clearer for everybody. Am I right? All right, so other clarifying questions, maybe. Go ahead, Jen.
David,
Oh, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
So if I understand correctly, it's a 4-lesson activity in the States mirroring what is going on at that service in Israel?
So yes, it's a 3, I don't know the exact number I'd want to do yet, but it would be like, say, 4-part series that doesn't mimic or mirror what's going on, but dives into some of the critical moments in that service. So they can like serve as guideposts to help an American understand what is going on through that. There are about 3, I've identified about 3 or 4, I think, foundational text moments there that would be useful in like helping a person who's not familiar with this type of experience or event find their path along the way so they don't kind of fall apart from the beginning.
Other clarifying questions?
Is the event all in Hebrew? Like, do you have to be a Hebrew speaker to be able to? I mean, I know that your point is to help people know what's going on, but do you have to be a Hebrew speaker to know what's going on?
It's a great question. There are English translations of this service, and some synagogues have run this through that English translation. The Hebrew version is much more complete. And in order to participate in like a, you want to do it every year, there's no guarantee that there's an English service being run or an English adaptation. So that may be a challenge to overcome of like someone's actually got to run the service in an accessible way.
David, I have a quick clarifying question. When you say you have a young adult population in mind, who specifically are you talking about?
Sure. I do work with Moshe House, and I think it's a really interesting Moshe House. Do I need to explain it, or?
Does everyone know what Moshe House is? Maybe
I
explain.
can give like a Moshe House, 22 to 32-year-old communities that center around a home, generally with 3 to 5 roommates who come together. And in addition to living there and making it their home, put on programming and make it a Jewish communal space in a way as well. They have a brief to run kind of a spectrum of programming types, including Jewish learning. And to answer your question, I see there's in that population, I see there's a lot of interest in working with Israel and a lot of, I don't want to say lack of skill, but like lack of thinking they have the skills to do it. They feel there's a very high bar of entry. And I think this program would help make that a bit more accessible, while also offering an opportunity for ritual, which I think is like one of the reasons people come to that community is to make ritual in community. And this could be a nice one around Israel as well.
Thank you.
We're going to run into or merge into the probing questions, because I think we're moving in that direction as well. And if I may, I'm going to take the privilege of asking the first probing question. Do you think it's necessary? I mean, I hear that you want to do it like to prep pre-Yom HaZikaron to explore these texts, and then sort of harking onto what Sydney said. Do you think it's necessary to sort of participate in the live stream or the video of the actual event? Or, is that maybe too big of a stretch? I just wonder about your thinking along those lines. Like the examining the texts and learning them sounds very rich and very appropriate. And I'm just wondering about that jump to the.
Sure. I think the background I'm coming from is I tried to run a similar program, and a barrier that I think I ran into, and I'm truly not sure if this model solves it, is that there's like an emotive reaction and an emotive connection that is so crucial to this in many ways. And I think without the ceremony, there is like a lot of that emotive connection that's lost, or it's hard to build into the learning experience. And an open question for me is like, truly, is this experience translatable, or like, translatable in a way. And like, I would see, if we're thinking like iterative of how this could work, I would see participating in the service as a first opportunity to see if that works. And if not, we'd have to think of a different way to kind of bring that emotive element to it.
Thank you. Other probing questions, things people want to know a little bit more about before we can come up with some ideas for David. Go ahead, Suze.
David, so when you said it didn't work the last time that you tried this, can you tell us more about what you thought didn't work, and or if there were parts that did work, and any direct feedback that you got from participants, if it was a similar group or a different group?
I'll say it was run online, which is like a whole set of challenges on its own. And I'm just going to put those to the side for a second, because let's envision it's in person. One thing that was very, very good, well-received feedback was the use of music. In the online setting, we were able to pair text with musical renditions of it. And that in many ways bridged a language barrier, in that like the kind of emotion of a text in Hebrew that doesn't sing as well in English sometimes could really come out. We used Israeli artists who had made recordings specifically like for settings like this. And I think that was like a really strong feedback point of this works. The general feedback of why it didn't work is that the ceremony is built on like kind of an arc. The Havdalah element is a real high in the experience, and there was not enough heat in some way to get us there through the learning. The learning was interesting questions, but very carved in many ways, in terms of the presentation and the methodology. And I think a real rework needs to go into how to build up to that if you're trying to incorporate learning into it as well. And my answer right now is to separate that out. I'm not sure it's the exact right formula, but it's what I envisioned first.
All right, thank you. I'm going to ask David to turn off his camera right now. And I want to ask us to have a conversation as if David's not here, of our ideas for David to pursue in exploring what he's exploring. Okay? So I really hope everyone has something to contribute to that and can open up on that. Go ahead, Sydney.
So I'm thinking about, and I guess it might have been more of a probing question, I'm not sure, but like, if this is more meant to be programmatic with a learning element, or more learning with a programmatic element. And I think that like those are two different things. And I think that it's probably important for him to think about what that looks like. Is it something that people are committing to and signing up for and saying, I want to learn specifically about this, or is it come to my Israel program and you're going to learn about this while you're there kind of thing?
Great point. I think that's the nut of where I think he's at, that he has a great resource, both the actual event, which can be very moving to observe and participate in, and the actual resources, which are like really great learning tools. So to make that, for him to make a choice or prioritize and plan appropriately with that prioritization. Great point.
I have another, but if somebody else wants to go first, they can go.
Go ahead, add it in.
My other thing is that I'm wondering if there's perhaps a way to bring this back to an experience that Americans more closely relate to. And if David could like find a way to model this for our own Memorial Day or 4th of July or something like that, and like create a model ceremony equivalent, having learned about this from other contexts.
Great. Other thoughts, suggestions we might make to David if he had hired us as his consultants?
So this is to piggyback on Sydney. Again, I don't know if it's a clarification question, but like would the model be some learning sessions leading up to something celebratory? Not celebratory, but like a experiential kind of the program that was, again, it's repeating what Sydney said, but that's what I was thinking about. Is it leading up to that? And I was also wondering what about inviting some Israelis, to have some Israelis present who perhaps have or have not been to that particular event in Israel, that service.
Great idea. Great idea. Sherry.
I was going to say, trying to connect experientially to the event. I was just wondering what that might look like if this would be something that they would watch, like on a little screen, or if they could make it big and immersive and have implements there, like, I don't know, just whatever the implements that they're going to use in the live service, and food or something that makes them feel connected to the whole thing, like for the portion of it that they're trying to connect with what they're doing over there.
Lovely. Alyssa, any thoughts? So I want to add, Susie, I'll get to you next, okay? I'm thinking similarly, the Beit Tefillah Israeli in general, and this event in particular, is very powerful. They do, they have a full band and sound system and amazing resources. So in terms of the emotional connection, I mean, their videos are online. So I'm wondering this whole challenge to spark people emotionally. So I could see him doing it almost as the teaser of like, let's see a little bit of this powerful musical experience. Then let's study these particular texts about this particular moment. And then I actually originally heard him, and I thought this is where he was going, it was before I knew he was doing it with Moshe House, all the more so that if they study the text and study the event, that they could then be charged with, okay, now you create something in the Moshe House community. Again, and it could go to where Sydney was going. Maybe it's on July 4th, or maybe it's on Memorial Day or something, or it is specifically, at Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut, and becomes a moment for this American Jewish community to do something moving and meaningful at that moment. And if that were the case, I would then see like he does the learning, maybe it's in February, and then they have, March and April to plan something. So just an idea, Susie, and then we'll break and bring David back.
Perfect. Piggybacking on agreeing first with everything that Marian said. I wanted to highlight the fact that he said that what did work was the music. And so that is very powerful. And so if it's using the examples of the already videotaped events to get the feeling for that, I think that gives an element for those who are planning if they want to do their own version of. So I'm thinking as a possibility of their own version of But rather than what Sydney suggested as an option of going to an American holiday altogether, I'm thinking of what American Havdalah looks like for those who've been to camp or in youth groups or in synagogue groups at a Shabbaton, and maybe using some of the elements of Havdalah in a way that they do know it, in a way that they feel will be powerful for the participants with this content in mind.
Great. All right, I'm getting mindful of the time, so I'm going to quickly bring David back, please. And David, you have like a minute to say anything you'd like to.
Sure. I'll say, like Sydney, I think you hit on my ulterior motive of this is like, I want this program run for me and I want people to do it with me. So like, that's basically where I'm at. So like, my priority is like the learning to get people there, and I'd love someone else to do the program, but like you really hit on that. Sure, I think your point about tactile elements and like bringing in the things that would be used and the objects and the artifacts that would be there was great, and I love that. I truly have reservations about like applying it to an American holiday because I think it's a lens into something uniquely Israeli, and like that's my perspective on it. But I'd be curious to see how others may take that too. So.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, consultants, for helping David through this. I'm going to pick somebody just so we can not belabor. So Sherry, I see you're unmuted. So are you ready to go?
I mean, I could. I mean, I think. I mean, I'm requesting an incomplete in the class, so I'm behind in this. The resource that I was thinking of, and I'm not sure if it's going to be appropriate in this situation or not, is I was really struck by that comparative narrative curriculum that we briefly touched on in class. And I know that there's, I think a few available. And I feel like with the community that I'm in, that would be the most appropriate, because I live in just such a wildly progressive community where you just really can't be sure who you can talk about Israel to, even in the synagogue. So I feel like this would be a great resource. And I'm trying to think of the age group, because I'm going to be teaching 7th graders, and I'm not sure if it's too mature for 7th graders or if I should aim this towards teenagers. So and I don't have necessarily access to the teenagers at this time, although if I wanted to do a special program that I probably could. But that is sort of what my thinking is. I don't have a lot of thought around what that might look like. Some of the thoughts I've had has been, basically, studying it like with the event and then both narratives. And I don't know whether we would have people broken up into groups, one taking the Palestinian side and one taking the Israeli side, and maybe recommending that people take the side opposite of what they would be normally inclined to take, so that they could go deeper in the perspective to try to broaden their own perspective. But that's about as far as I've gotten with this.
Great, thank you. So do people have any clarifying questions? I think it's pretty clear, right? Any probing questions? Go ahead, David.
I'd love if you could share a little more about what you mean by the Israeli narrative and the Palestinian narratives in this context, and why are they like mutually exclusive?
Sure.
Or I'm seeing them as exclusive here.
So are you familiar with the resource that I'm talking about? It might have been at a time that you weren't present in our class.
I'm kind of looking out for it on the side right now.
Okay. Okay. So
if it's
one of
answered in that, I'll answer.
No, that's okay. Let me just expound on it a little bit, because I could use some clarification. But we have a resource that talks about, I think there's 3 volumes of this, maybe, or 3. There's 2 or 3 of them, and they go through significant events in Israeli history, Israeli-Palestinian history. And so they have this, the curriculum is built, it's like the page has like 3 columns. On the left-hand side column is looking at, let's just say, Yom HaAtzmaut or something like that, or no, let's just say the day that Israel declared independence in 1948. It would have a teaching about it or a narrative from the Israeli perspective. And then on the right-hand side of the page, it's a narrative from the Palestinian perspective of how they saw those events. And then in the middle, there's just some blank lines for the student to be able to write their own perspective or their own processing of what they're understanding from reading both sides. Does that clarify at all?
Yeah, and I have a hopefully better question now, but I'll let other people jump in instead.
I just want to give a point of information for the clarification that this is a curriculum that was developed by Jewish Israeli and Palestinian Israeli teachers, and that it has been pilot tested in a number of schools in Israel, but generally taught by that kind of a team where they're teaching it together.
So maybe in a situation, maybe if I was going to present this to a youth group or to my 7th graders, that I would want to invite a Palestinian American who lives in my community and see if they would be interested. I'm a little nervous about how all of this would, I don't know if I feel equipped to be able to handle what might come from that. And that's my biggest concerns. And in my community, I can see, I mean, it was definitely something that I would have to run through the congregational rabbi, because there's a lot of potential for this to not go well.
So I want to add in then and clarify a little bit to sort of separate out for you the possibility of using that curriculum in your class and what we need for what you should be working on or can be working on for the final project. That book, that curriculum material, and I haven't looked at it recently, but I believe 99% of it are primary source documents, where it's not just someone's narrative, it's an actual document, whether it's a newspaper article or a speech that somebody gave, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I would think, and this also will help you think through this, your nervousness appropriately of, are you prepared to teach this? I think for the purposes of our class, I would choose one of the pages, making sure that the two things are really primary sources, that it's not someone's interpretation, but it's a newspaper article or a speech or something like that. And you should investigate those two things, figure out where they came from, what they really are saying, what it is, really come from it just as what it is. And then thinking about, okay, and now how can you potentially use this in your community? And I would suggest that you potentially may not want to go directly to the teens yet, but maybe the program that you're thinking about is convening a group of parents to investigate this together first, before it would be presented to the kids. So that's one piece of it. The other thing I was thinking a lot about as you were talking about this are all those resources, both the book, which of course now I'm blanking on the title, the Greengrass and Dauber Stern book.
Arguments.
For the sake of
For the sake of argument, right? To go into that book and look at some of the activities that and this would be not necessarily for our paper, but if you really were going to do this, use some of those activities of how do you bring these controversial topics and opposing viewpoints to a group and create the environment where how do you have the conversation? So just some thoughts, but I love the idea of you using that as the primary source, because it's such a rich thing to start from. And I think would really be valuable for you, Sherry, to, forget about applying it for the kids right now. Think of it as you as a graduate student. What do I need to learn about these two documents? And what when I learn about them, what does that mean for how I might be able to use them in my school? Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else have a probing before we go into some other? Go ahead, Jen.
So I had like a part A and part B. Would this be for your your synagogue school program?
It would either be for my synagogue, the class that I'd be teaching, or it would be a youth activity, or possibly even an adult activity, but I don't necessarily feel confident about that.
So then my second question was, does the synagogue, kind of thinking about what Marian said about studying with the parents, does your synagogue have a Israel? Some synagogues have an Israel committee. If that's
my synagogue absolutely has an Israel committee that is by invitation only, because I've asked about it. You have to be invited to be on the committee. And it is very balanced in terms of it's got some very, it's got a very strong balance of perspectives in the committee, if that makes sense. Without, there's people that love Israel, and there are people that I think have very critical thoughts about Israel on the committee. So that's a really good idea of running it past the committee or inviting them into the process, maybe. Is that what you're suggesting? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Other probing, or we'll ask Sherry to turn off her video and we'll talk about her and her project. All right. So Sherry, turn off the video, please. All right. What thoughts do we have? Go ahead, Susan.
So it might have been a probe, but I think I understand why Sherry might want to be doing this, given the population that she says she's dealing with, where she feels that they have strong opinions, but not a lot of actual information to back up the opinions. So assuming that that is one of her assumptions, I can see where she might want to go with this. I have a suggestion, which I've done with the public school teachers I worked with who teach 6th to 12th grade students. And that is, we chose just a piece of, as you had suggested, Marion. In this case, they looked at the partition plan, the events leading up to the partition plan of November 29th, 1947, and taking different roles. People took the roles of the UN committee that was doing the research, Arab/Palestinian residents of Palestine at the time, and Jewish residents of Palestine at the time. And that was a way of getting at multiple perspectives. Sometimes they're cross messages, but understanding the complexity of the situation, which I believe might be one of Sherry's ultimate educational goals for anyone participating in such a program.
Great. Thank you, Jen and David, for raising your virtual hands. So Jennifer.
I just wanted to say that I love the idea. Let me lower my hand. I just love the idea of doing this with teenagers and, getting into something that's I don't know, when I teach teenagers, I like to get into really touchy, sensitive hot topics to get them talking. So I like, Sherry had talked about doing it with middle schoolers or high schoolers. I think the topic is a good one, sensitive enough that they would get engaged.
Great. David?
I'd like suggest and be curious to read through the primary sources and pull out from the comparative ones what it's really saying, to see if you could form an essential question that brings those two ideas into conversation. I would wonder if there are examples where those are either not in tension or too far away, where it'd be hard to draw an essential question together. And maybe that means bringing in additional sources on both sides to add some color and vibrancy around a question that could be articulated, or taking the Palestinian narrative in one session, the Jewish narrative in another session, and then bringing them back together.
Great.
For a specific historical event.
Great, thank you. Alyssa?
I love this idea. I think it's awesome. I just wanted to say, nothing probing, no questions, just more comments that I see this kind of program, or even an event, as something very interactive amongst your students or youth. I mean, if you do it, there's high schoolers, even middle schoolers. This could definitely be something that they, you can form a debate. Let them do their research and let them come prepared. And I just see this being a really fun, interactive event that you make out of this.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my 2 cents.
Great. Jen, did you raise your hand again? Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, I'm on mute because I have full house here. I wonder, kind of piggybacking what I said, because if it's such a hot topic, if Sherry needs to go up the food chain a little bit to make sure what the stance is of the synagogue, whether it's the rabbi or the ed director, I don't know if she's just the teacher, the ed director or the Israel committee, to see what the stance is, if she should be, what exactly should be the message.
Yep. And David, did you re-raise your hand also?
I did. I hope
Okay,
I'm not
go
taking
for it.
too much time.
No.
I actually kind of, I want to put another opinion based on Susie's comments, actually. I'd be curious of defining what type of conversation you're having. If we're buying Greengrass's argument, I'm not sure we can have a compromise and a healthy argument together, and defining your purpose in the session would be really useful.
Great. I'm glad you brought that. Sydney, do you want to add something? Were you about to unmute?
I was kind of thinking along the same lines of what David just said. I don't know that necessarily the purpose should be like arguing that one side is right over the other and trying to convince people otherwise. Like, I don't know that like putting these two groups up against each other is the right way to do it, but having a dialogue about it and like working through to understand each side, I think is what is important, right? And again, using the sake of the argument book as a great model for it. But I think that it's important to not have them like going at each other, I guess,
Right.
in a way, especially in what sounds like a very divided community.
Right.
You're going to have probably parents upset on either side. And I also would be sensitive to like, I don't know that I would want to take on a narrative that I'm not comfortable with, like that I don't agree with, whatever it may be, whether it's this or something different. So I think also thinking about that, and like, it's important to push our students out of their comfort zone, but not to the point that they are actually uncomfortable. So just things to think about.
I want to appreciate that both of you brought up the framing that Robbie and Abby had, because I think it's very powerful to think about. And I want to add, just for all the projects, and the whole purpose of this exercise is not to grab some sort of pre-made curriculum, but to sort of go back to the source and look at the source and figure out what is it that bringing the source to the group can add and can bring. And I think knowing these documents, and look, a debate on these things, this is a conundrum that is centuries old. There's no resolution of this debate. Certainly not that that could be had in 45 minutes with a bunch of teenagers by any stretch of the imagination, and not one that can happen in the UN or Camp David or et cetera, right? But I do think what is so juicy and interesting is bring the kids the real stuff. Let them see what it is that the two sides really believe and think, and their actual documents, not about proving that one's right or one's wrong, but to engage with the primary source. And that, I think, as educators is our job. And it even goes to where David started, that his young adults don't have the content knowledge. So bring them something that's not not negotiable in the sense of this is the real thing. Let's see what it says. Let's not argue with it. Let's not ask its validity. Let's accept it as valid and learn from it and have it as part of our backpacks. So
I'm just going to say another example of that would be taking the Balfour Declaration, and we have lots of great resources. Some of you saw some additional enrichment I put up on that, but there's an exercise that you can do where you're really looking at that document very closely, and then looking at documents from that same era that the Arab and Palestinian parties in the neighborhood thought spoke to their side of history or of what should be happening in this very contested area. So I think, again, it's basing on the actual documents and being open to, I think, just like in great Chavruta study, you don't have to accept the other person's interpretation necessarily, but you can't legitimately stick with your own interpretation until you truly understand the other person's interpretation. So I think that can be a very helpful way of doing yes and in an expansive way.
All right, I'm going to bring Sherry back, trying to be mindful of the time and not cut off this really rich conversation. But so Sherry, just a go around of any comments, thoughts you have at this juncture.
I absolutely loved everybody's input. I scribbled notes as fast as I could. I love the challenges of, well, boy, everybody had something really wonderful to say. I liked the idea of not pinning people against each other or making them take on something that they're going to feel really uncomfortable about. I like the idea of not leaning on the curriculum, but really leaning on the source material and using the curriculum maybe as a launching pad to look at the source material and then to take it even further and go deeper. I really, really love the idea of incorporating the Greengrass book into this, and so I'm gonna order. I should have ordered it already. I'm gonna order it and incorporate this in. So thank you. This was really good.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, consultants. All right, Jennifer, you ready?
Yes. You said 3 minutes. I'm going to set my timer too, so I can.
Yeah,
pace
so I'm
myself.
hoping we can get through each one for 15 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
All
Each-
right.
yeah.
There we go. Okay, I set my own time so I can pace myself. So I was very excited by this project. I'm thinking about the Teen Philanthropy Board that I run. We meet monthly, 9th through 12th graders, about an hour and a half each month or so. And the background is that we receive money from our Israel and Overseas Committee, which we go through a process of allocating to organizations in Israel, specifically in our partnership region of Sovev Kinneret. So I was inspired by this, a couple of things we did those we had those slides we had a comment on, and the 2 slides I worked on weeks ago was about supporting Israel from the diaspora. And there was a whole article about JNF, or not a whole article, but like a picture of the JNF box. And this particular picture, which I'm going to pull up, was my inspiration for this project. I don't know if I could share my screen, may or may not.
You should be able to, but let me see if I have to give you permission. Does it let you?
Let's see. Yes. So,
Yeah.
so I was brainstorming with my friend who's an Israel educator late last night, and she had sent me this picture. We're not sure what museum it's in, but this was a burnt out JNF box that was found in the Warsaw Ghetto. And around it is a bunch of different JNF boxes. If you look kind of above, you can see it looks the same. So my thought would be, and then I found a couple of articles. Someone knows what museum this is from. I need to do a little research to find it. I assume it's in Israel. The label's in Hebrew. But so my thought would be and I found a couple of articles on like the history of the creation of the JNF box in particular, the blue box. So my thought would be to use this as an inspiration to talk about, tzedakah boxes, and this one in particular for the teens, about giving and supporting Israel philanthropically remotely. Here, I'm going to unshare my screen now. I'm thinking of doing it in a few different ways. I have a few different options. My options are, as I mentioned before, we have a partnership class in Israel. So using these sorts of lessons as part of that project, or do like each month, take out 15 minutes and do like an Israel minute or an Israel 15 minutes, and talk about this. Susie added a couple of things. She commented doing something with Montefiore Rothschild to talk about their involvement in their projects. This, I didn't click on the link, but I find this fascinating because I was thinking about it, is Susie also talked about any halakha, look at the history of the halakha to support Jews in the 4 holy cities after the Ottoman conquest.
Sorry, chalukah.
Halukha. Oh,
Like lechalek.
Okay, I'm not even sure that. Divvy up. Okay, so not halakha. I was thinking halakha.
So it
Which is-
connects to halakha. It actually does connect to halakha, but not important.
So I need to think about that. And then the other thing is, in the last 10 seconds is I'm brainstorming ways to make we meet at the JCC in a boardroom. So my other thought was, I'm trying to make the space a little more cozy, and having everyone bring a tzedakah box and getting a bunch of JNF boxes, which is really easy, and make that our centerpiece each week. And also ask them to bring tzedakah each month, ask them to bring tzedakah. I'm done. Thank you.
Great, thank you, thank you. So clarifying questions. All right, I think it's pretty clear. Susie, go ahead. Go ahead.
So my clarifying question for you, because we talked about so many possibilities, your juices were flowing during our semester, our intensive week together. Is this going to be for something for your board here to do as a twinning thing with counterparts in the Sovev Kinneret area? Is this to do together, or is this just for your US-based teen board?
Am I allowed to answer?
Yeah.
Oh, that was part of my wondering, because if I do it with just the self-selecting, the group's going to be self-selecting who's going to be twinning, it'll just be a handful of kids. But if I do it as like 15 minutes of Israel each month, then it would be everybody. So I'm kind of, if anyone hasn't picked about that, going back.
Okay, we'll
and
get to
forth.
that during the
But
consultancy.
everybody, yeah, but I should say everyone will be voting on where our allocation is going that we receive from the Federation. So it would put it in context for everybody for that activity.
Great. Any other, go ahead, David.
Teen philanthropy, very specific clarifying question. Can your teens raise funds on top of what is provided as a pass-through from the Israel and Overseas Committee, or do they only allocate what the Israel and Overseas Committee gives you to Israel program?
Actually, I didn't think about, like, we raise money above and beyond, and it goes into the giant pushki of where we give for our local charities. But I wonder if we could move it to add to your, as you're saying, the allocation from the Israel and Overseas Committee from the Federation. That's a good question.
Any other clarifying questions, or can we go to probing? Or right into the consultancy? We ready to give Jennifer some suggestions and thoughts? Oh, wait, Jen, turn off your video. Okay. All right. Sherry, you ready to say something? Or you just, okay, you just unmuted. So I'll just start. She sent Susie and me the picture last night, and I couldn't tell what it was. So I'm really glad that she shared that now, because I think that's really a valuable place to start. And I think it shows sort of the power of using a primary source of, like, totally unmediated, like, what is this thing? Why is it important? And let's learn about it. And then let's figure out what message it brings to us and what actions we can do from that. So I think that's really powerful. And just another comment I'm going to make. So Susie, I don't know what you talked to Jennifer. I mean, I know a little bit obviously about what the halukah was in the 4 cities and all that. But I was thinking when Jennifer said the halacha, obviously there's lots of citations from the Mishnah of how the Jews in the diaspora should be supporting the Jews. So there are definitely some source materials that she could jump to.
So
there.
I posted those already on the First Thoughts discussion board. Even I gave her a Wikipedia link that actually gives you the halachot about how one is supposed to give priority to allocation of funds for tzedakah to Eretz Yisrael. So that gave her some of the background to be able to think about if that's something she wanted to include in. She was thinking about historic study of the relationship of Jews outside of Israel to what was happening in Palestine or pre-state Israel, and then state of Israel post-declaration. So those are all on the discussion board that you guys can all have access to. And the artifact that she shared, I actually found it in one of the links that she put up. It actually showed that particular box, only a very crystal clear vision, a view of it. So she had some of that. One in the consultancy mode, I did raise a question that I put on the discussion board, and she said she wanted to think about it, is what is the message? If she is thinking of doing this together with the Israeli counterparts, what is the message of only talking about philanthropy that comes from the diaspora to Israel or to Palestine? So that's really a big something to think about. And then I suggested if it was going to be joint between those two groups, potentially to have the kids in Israel following this up with a unit on philanthropy within Israel and some projects that teens get involved in, even currently in Israel. So that it's not a sense of that the money comes from our rich relatives in the diaspora who don't come and actually do the work of building the country and living in the country. They just pay for stuff. So that was my cautionary thought there.
Great. David.
I would say that philanthropy and the rise of philanthropy in Israel is like a fascinating topic, and I'd love to see that included into this. My kind of like consultancy mode here is thinking about like younger audience. I don't know if it's just me, but like JNF Box in some ways feels like an anachronism sometimes, of like blue box to land purchases and forests doesn't translate as well now. And maybe use of your Israel Minute time to kind of draw a similar parallel of like the blue box of today goes to these types of projects to make the connection feel very real and spark that connection.
Mm-hmm.
Lovely. Lovely. Any other thoughts? Go ahead, Sydney.
So I messaged this to Jen individually, but I'll put it in the chat for everyone to see actually. Jen, I sent it to you on WhatsApp. But JNF has online like a whole series of different blue boxes over the years and where they've come from. And I think that something like that could be really valuable to bring to your students. And also, I think that it's a great opportunity to not just bring in the tzedakah and like philanthropic side of it, but also the historic piece of this, and looking at the fact that for much longer than the state of Israel has existed, the blue box has existed, right? And there's a picture in here. The very last one is the blue box that sat on Herzl's desk. And there's a different burnt one from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and things like that. And I think that it's a great opportunity also to look at what's on the box. Like the third one says Israel in the 1960s. And it's like very clearly two young children working the land and things like that. And so I think that it's a great parallel, whether it's for Jen or for anybody who wants to use these as a primary source for any sort of program moving forward, looking at what does tzedakah mean at this time in our world, what's going on in Israel, how do people see Israel, and all of these different things can kind of all go together at once.
Wonderful. I love how you brought that together, because I think that's exactly part of how we love to see the primary source generate all kinds of avenues in. What also striking me, and I think it was Jennifer who shared this, how she loves the poster display in the airport all the time. And I know that one year it was the history of those, not the blue boxes, but the posters of what was the messaging on the JNF posters. So again, this is, I don't mean to be a broken record, but I think this is the purpose of having this meeting together, is to really push up to our consciousness how generative primary sources can be. That and the purpose of being a graduate student is to be able to create for yourself access to primary sources that you can then bring to your students. So all of the above that Sydney just shared, and I'm also picturing when Jennifer said about creating the environment, let the students create the environment, let them do some research, let them create, and to David's point, let them create what would the 21st century, the 2022-23 version of a blue box be? Like, let them create, maybe it's an app and maybe it's a bot and who knows, right? And that becomes the environment in which the kids sit. So there's so much wonderful things that can be generated from just the deep investigation of the primary source. I'm going to let David have the last word, and then we'll move on to the next person.
I can give it to Sherry because I've already shared. If Sherry, if you want to share.
I didn't see your dark hand there against the blurred background. Okay, I was wondering. Okay, great, go for it.
Sorry about that.
Thank you, David. Thank you for pointing that out.
This might have already been mentioned when I was running to let the dog out, so I apologize if I am repeating anything, but I'm struck by the difference between when Israel was in the very beginning stages of before being born and becoming born, and the sense of ownership that the diaspora Jews had about participation in the creation of this entity versus how the generation, not necessarily our generation, or maybe some of your generation, see themselves as part of the ownership of, I don't know if it's coming out right, the attitude of us being a part of making this happen versus what people believe today, and what, maybe just taking a look at the differences in attitude and perspective about that, and how connected people, the young generation feels towards our responsibility in making the building of the land and the success of the land, if that makes sense.
Yep. I just want to put an asterisk on that comment, because yes, it makes a lot of sense. And that's also obviously the purpose of these youth philanthropy groups. And to David's point of, how do we do it in partnership with our Israel counterparts? I mean, there's so many interesting layers to this. The other thing, though, that I want to sort of bring up for everybody is the same way that we looked at the Technion being founded before the establishment of the state, and we didn't do, the National Water Carrier was founded before the founding of the state. JNF was founded before the founding of the state, partly because of, to Sherry's point, this literally pioneering attitude of, if we're not in this to make it happen, no one's going to make it happen. So to tap into that a little bit too, of like, how can we in the 21st century make that relevant for the next, even the next generation, for you guys, not just for Susie and me, but how do we do that? So I'm going to close this so that we can get on to the next person. So Jennifer, come on back and comment or reflect or whatever, and we'll move on to the next person.
I just wanted to thank everybody for their comments. I too took 2 pages of notes, and I feel really good about this. In the past couple of years, Israel's just been, we've done 1 session, allocated the funding and moved along. So I think you've given me a lot of good ideas to really make it Israel part of the whole year. And so it's not just so like out of context that we're doing this process of giving money during 1 session. So thank you.
Fabulous. Great. All right, let's move on. Alyssa, you ready?
I chose, and Paul, let me know if my mic goes out.
You just froze. Yeah, you froze also for a second there. So.
All right, sorry. So yeah, again, just let me know if my mic cuts out, because it tends to do that. So I am going to, based on the demographic that I work with, young children, I am going to focus on Hanok Hiven. I really enjoyed working with his theories, and I brought in my self-portrait to work, and I've been showing the kids, and I've been asking them, like, what do you think these represent about me? And like the kids, first thing the kids saw were the earrings. They saw the hoops, and they were like, those are your earrings. Like, these are my 4 and 5-year-olds. So, but I was actually thinking, I was looking at his websites and everything like that, and I really liked what he did with the with Ben Gurion. There's he has like a few different he did like 4 different portraits of Ben Gurion and different things that represented him. And what I'd actually like to do with my religious school students, so my older students, my 6th and 7th graders, is I want to challenge them by giving them, having them pick an Israeli hero or a famous Israeli, anybody, somebody Israeli, obviously. It could be political, it could be astronaut, anything they want to, and do a little bit of research and bring that back so they can create their own portrait of that person and what they represent. And I also, so I want to focus not just on, I want to focus on the people, but the land as well. So I also want to do, I want to do it a couple of times, but I want them to not just pick a person, I want them to pick a place in Israel. And then we'll come together and make art and use things that they see that represents that area, whether it's the north, the south, you know, so that's kind of the lines where I'm going. Not as in depth as everybody else's, because I work with younger kids, but you know, I'd give them a nice good background on Hanoch Piven and where he came from, why he chooses to do his art the way he does, and actually stress the fact that he doesn't consider himself a good artist, which is why his art is the way it is. So which I think is really cool, because I think he's an incredible artist, and articles I've read, he doesn't consider himself an artist. So because a lot of kids, you know, a lot of these kids don't think of themselves as artists. So I want them to be able to think of themselves the same way he does and bring their own creativity, their own way of art into it, and using Israel with that theme. So
Great. Thank you. Any clarifying questions? So I just have oh, David, I see your hand. Go ahead.
I just like, is there more specificity on like the brief of like find an Israel character or like find a place? Is there like more scope to what they're trying to like find before they're creating it?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Like, is it like themed like find a politician or find a sports figure, or is it just find a famous Israel? Like, what's the scope of their research, I guess is my question.
You know, when I was looking, you know, when I put in research, when I was really heroes, you know, everybody that popped up were war heroes, and, you know, names that are not so much known. So, you know, I would like them to focus on something they're familiar with. You know, so, you know, when we teach the kids about Israel, so they learn about Ben Gurion, and they learn about, you know, they know these names, they know Herzl, they know, you know, and it could be even somebody biblical if they want to. It could be anything they want, something that they feel that they could connect to. You know, if it's an athlete, if they're, you know, I don't want them to feel forced to research or look into something they don't have interest in. I want it to be something that they are interested in. So I will most likely just give them the option, be like, if you want to do a sports person, do that. If you want to do a biblical person, do that. So I really, I think for the setting of my school, just giving them that freedom to really choose something that they're interested in, as opposed to forcing something on them.
Great, thank you. I think you kind of answered my clarifying question, but I just want to clarify. You've already introduced some of this to your preschoolers, but for the purpose of our project, you're going to focus on the 7th graders. Is that, did I get that right?
Yes. So for the purpose, because I haven't seen my religious school students because it's still summer.
Oh, right. Duh.
So,
Even though we're working like crazy people.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I have, like, you know, I brought it, even actually the preschool wants to do something with it. We want to actually, I was talking to my boss about using it as a professional development with my coworkers and teaching them about Piven and his style, and then having each classroom create their own Piven style piece of art that represents their class. You know, the 4 and 5-year-olds, the infants, you know, because they're very different. So so I've been in talks with my bosses about how we can incorporate into the preschool and with the 4 and 5-year-olds, because I think that's something that they would enjoy as well. Everybody else is too young, but my focus for the project itself is going to be my religious school. I think the 6th and 7th graders. So,
Great. Any other clarifying and or probing questions, or do we feel like we have enough to be consultants to Alyssa?
I have a probing question, maybe needing a consultant answer, but I'm curious if you're going to do this as an iterative process of like doing like a person and then places kind of a couple of times. How do you plan to introduce or reintroduce Hanoch Piven or a connection to Israel when you do that, so it doesn't just become an art form?
That is a good question. So, I mean, what we could do, or is like, what I can talk to my Israeli teacher who's doing this, is we can focus on a unit of, you know, Israeli art, and just focus on Piven. I'm not really 100% sure how I want to introduce it to the students, like, as opposed to just as art. But that's a good question, but I haven't thought that far ahead yet.
Yeah. Oh, Rob, I'm teaching.
I don't know who started Romney.
Wait, excuse me, everybody. Sorry. Honey, I'm in the middle of teaching.
Sorry,
Okay.
I didn't know who started Romney.
I don't know either. You can turn her off.
No,
Such is
hi-
life, such is life today.
Sorry, guys. Okay. What I want to say is to Alyssa's point, and Alyssa, this is kind of what I think I was trying to say to you on the discussion board and/or when I emailed you privately, I don't remember. Again, for the purpose of our class, some research about Piven and his background and what makes him uniquely Israeli and how he, who he is, why he is. That's for our purposes. In the classroom, and to David's point, I mean, there are going to be times when it's very appropriate to bring his background, and there are going to be times that it's all fine and good, just you're bringing this wonderful activity to them. So just to sort of also like to striate, to level off, like not pushing together the purposes of our class and the things that you do normally with your students. God willing, much of what we've taught, not just in this class, but in the whole degree, you're bringing into your classroom, but it shouldn't be all the time, always. So, okay. So I just want to clarify that. All right. So why don't you close the video and we'll consult. And I will try not to be yelling at my husband while we're doing that. I am sorry. Sorry about that. Just too much going on. All right. So go ahead, Sydney.
So my first idea is, well, a few things. First, I think that it's important, especially for 6th and 7th graders who are like really just learning how to effectively Google. I tried a couple of years ago to like have a bunch of 7th and 8th graders like research somebody, and they were like, we don't know how to find anything. They don't know how to find resources that aren't Wikipedia. So I think that it's important to give them a set list of people who they can research, and B, print out the research or give them links that take them directly to the page about that specific person. Just like maturity wise, they're not necessarily going to be able to find all the information on their own. And then my second thought was that Alyssa had said something about not only doing it for people, but also wanting to do it for the land. And I'm thinking that it could be really cool and continue to enhance learning about that person if you then have to place that person in their land. So if you learn about somebody from Tel Aviv, you're going to make Tel Aviv. If you learn about somebody from the Negev, you're going to put them, if you're doing Ben Gurion, you're going to put him standing on his head on the beach in Tel Aviv, or you're going to put him in the Negev, in stable care. Something like that, I think could really enhance. So you're learning about land and people together.
Beautiful, beautiful. Sherry, go for it.
So I was wondering about utilizing the cards from the iCenter as the character cards, and maybe using those to introduce a variety of people. My first thought was, what I know that they have like, plastic covered posters. I've used some of those in my Holocaust class where I had special people, but then I was thinking that might not be practical, but you could use, get a series of posters from famous Israeli people and put them in your class. And that way, students can kind of wander around and get familiar. But the cards I thought might be really practical, kind of like the way that you have them spread across the room, and then the students can kind of do a tour and pick up things that they connect with, and then go from there to using Sydney's suggestions about using, Google resources, et cetera, to look them up.
Beautiful, wonderful.
The resource cards, just to clarify, I don't know if Marion, you were busy in the other room, but I have a set for you.
Thank you.
I went through my stores at home. There is a set that's political figures through time, but there's also a set that's artists or musicians or, including sports people, etc. So cultural icons too. So there is a wide range there that could be a good prompter to Sydney's point of not just having it be so open that they don't know where to even begin.
Right. Right. And if you think about like how we did the current events, and obviously it was us, you each chose something, but you chose something that was interesting to you. But to find, the sports figures and the film and TV and Netflix people and all that, things that are of current events and current interest. And again, to like channel the kids into some places that would be of interest to them. Sydney, is your hand still up or is it up again?
Yeah,
go
I had
go for
another
it.
idea. Sorry.
Okay, go for it.
I'm also thinking about like the Piven that we learned is a lot about like taking what somebody looks like and replicating them based on like physical attributes. But I'm also wondering if there's a unique way to do it where you like read something out loud and you describe a person, but describe more their personality. And you like have to make a Piven like thing based on much more like their character traits and attributes than physical, so that you're not just like staring at a picture of somebody, but you're really learning about them and who they were as a person.
That's a great point. I have 2 or 3 things I want to say, and I know Susie wants to say some stuff and our time's running short. I'm going to jump in and I'll let Susie finish. A couple of things. So first of all, I was thinking about that, Sydney, that there are plenty, Piven has his style, and yes, it is a lot about making the person look like the person, but obviously choosing things that may have resonance to who they are and what they are. So along those lines, something to do is to, obviously we had just a lot of stuff on the table to work from. You can really curate what you give the kids to work from. And it can be, you probably noticed, of course, we had some very very particular Israel things on the table. You can really even make that, narrower and narrower, that it's more Israel related things, more, again, like some newspaper clippings, some, wrappers from food, things that may be much more, in your face about how to make that person and their traits and not just their curly hair or whatever, right? And similarly, I was thinking about I love the idea of doing it about the land, and I love the adding in about putting the person in the land, but I was thinking the same thing with that sort of the Tel Aviv, the Negev, the Golan, the Jerusalem, obviously, there are certain things we know are from those areas. So again, to seed the sources that they can use to create the space. So just some ideas. Susie, you'll have the last word.
So I shared some of these resources already with Alyssa online, resources from the iCenter. There are umpteen examples where he actually demonstrates in short videos what is the concept of home, if you wanted to make that the thing you're talking about. Our home here, our home in Israel. He has one specifically about Ben Gurion where he did 4 different portraits of Ben Gurion, and you can do a whole exercise examining those really, really carefully to see the different aspects of where he fits in history, where he fits in terms of Jewish values. All of that, there are examples of that. And he, similarly to what Alyssa was talking about, he also does that with Moses, a biblical character that maybe the younger set within the group she works with might find resonance with. So there are both examples of that and ways you can play with it to take it further. And then the other thing is, if she wanted to do something with Israeli art, of course, Piven's not the only one. And I'd be happy to connect her with the Marot curriculum that we used to highlight and do workshops on, where it actually, where posters of famous works by Israeli artists, including Reuven and others that we may have mentioned in class, that can be done actually geared to an early childhood art curriculum to pay attention to details and whatever. So it is a way to know that Israeli art sometimes is reflective of the environment, of the weather and the terrain. And sometimes it's got historical information in it about immigrants and, you know, what their path might have been. So there are lots of possibilities there for art being both the content and the methodology to get to content.
Yep. And actually, Susie, as you're saying that, I thought I know we have it electronically. I thought it might have
I
been
do.
one of the ones that we had up for the curriculum investigation. Yeah.
I'm not sure if we did, but I do have that. So
Yeah, we do. We both.
I'd be happy to add that. I will.
Okay.
add.
All right, great. Thank you. Okay, so Alyssa, come on back.
So just to quickly show you
Yeah.
what Susie was talking about, these are the different portraits of Ben Gurion and what he represents. It's, you know, it's him in his different lands, you know, and it's not just what he looks like, you know, everything in these pictures represents something about who he was as a person and his beliefs and all that stuff. So that's definitely something that I want to do. And and I might actually try this with my high schoolers too. This actually might be even better for my high schoolers when in thinking about it. Well, Sydney was talking about the Googling and the research, which stop share. That you're saying, oh, video stop, sorry. So, but yeah, everything everybody said already crossed my mind. But I wrote everything down that you guys suggested. I love everything. Yeah, and I think this is something that I really have fun with the kids and them really get something out of it. So.
All right, I'm watching the time. I also want to remind everybody, we are recording this. So all of you that said you took a lot of notes, we're going to post this in the course so you can, you know, fast forward through everybody else's and get to yours and listen again carefully to what people said about yours. So Sydney, let's try and give Sydney our due. Are people willing to stay on for 5 more minutes? Till 4:35 Boston time. Thank you, David. You're the one. It's what it's 11:30 at night already almost.
I'll go quick. Don't worry. Okay.
We don't
So-
worry.
Good. That's good. Okay. So I think that the primary source I would like to work with is the Megillat Ha'atzmaut, Israel's Declaration of Independence. I don't have like a fully thought out idea yet, but like literally right before we came on, I was like, oh, and I like maybe have it. I'm not sure, but I'm thinking about something with creating art based on the Declaration of Independence. And as I wrote in the discussion board, I picked this because it's something that I, growing up was a lot less familiar with. And I don't really think that I encountered it until my adult life. And I loved doing the blackout poetry with Mikhail. It was like so amazing. And I would like to kind of play on that a little bit because I love the idea of like really getting to the nitty gritty of what it means. And so just for context, my synagogue, I'll be doing this with my 7th through 12th graders is my plan. And the synagogue that I work at, later on into our like mission vision statement, it says we offer religious, educational, and social experiences for all ages and seek to make a difference in our world by engaging in Israel advocacy, social action, and social justice. So to me, analyzing the Megillat Ha'atzmaut isn't necessarily engaging in advocacy in that moment, but I don't think that you can advocate for Israel without understanding it. So to me, this is a path along. This is something that is on the path to accomplishing that goal of being able to advocate for Israel. So my vision is that there would be either like that Maccabees video or something like that. We would read the text of the Declaration of Independence out loud, and either as it's being read or after it's done being read, students would have the opportunity to illustrate what they are hearing and kind of create a live piece of art as they are understanding it. And that might mean not gluing things down until the very end, but taking pieces and moving them around as different things are said and you hear things. And when it says strike out, maybe you move something or whatever it may be, but making it really tactile and hands-on and looking at your finished piece at the end and saying, this to me is representative of Israel's Declaration of Independence. So that's like my sort of initial thought.
Great, thank you. Any clarifying questions? Right, any,
Tell us the context within which you would include this with the 7th to 12th graders.
Yeah, so I teach a Monday evening teen class, and this year we're doing it unit based. So like between 3 to 5 sessions, they're like 2 hours each, an hour and a half of learning, half an hour dinner. And I think that this could be a great fit for our Israel session, which will be March, April. I think we'll probably have 4 or 5 sessions in that unit.
Great, thank you.
right. So, and then would you see like studying the Megillat Ta'atzmaut as one of the sessions and then doing the blackout poetry later on, or as part of the same 1.5 hour?
I don't think that I would do the blackout poetry. I feel like this is sort of like my play and spin on it.
Yes, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't mean,
think
yeah.
it would just be one session out of the 5, and maybe the next week we might do something totally different.
Got it.
But
Right, I'm sorry, I knew that you clarified that it wasn't exactly about blackout poetry, but yeah.
all good.
All right, great. Any other clarifying questions? All right, any probing questions?
This is just kind of,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry. No, you go ahead, David.
I'm curious if you would be bringing in other foundational texts like the Jewish state law and the human dignity law that kind of illuminates more of Israel's core values as well, or just use the Declaration of Independence?
You know, I haven't thought about it, but I think for the sake of not overwhelming my students who are probably also not familiar with this, I think probably just sticking to one text at a time is probably important.
I saw someone saying, yeah, Jennifer, it bounced over to the other corner there.
I'm wondering about, again, I don't know if this is for the consultant part, but I'm wondering about comparing and contrasting to something the kids may be more familiar with, like the American Declaration of Independence, if there's any value in that.
Yeah, for
Exploring-
sure.
Yeah.
All right, the probing questions should really be for us to get a better sense of where Sydney's head is at. And you're right, the suggestions should be us and the consultancy. So are there other probing questions, or should we jump into the consultancy?
I just want to say that for a probing question, at some point, Sydney, I think it'd be really good to have a conversation with the people who write up this this document of the statement for your congregation. What do they mean when they say Israel advocacy?
Yeah.
What are they envisioning that to be? And then this will either be reflective of that or be what you think is necessary as precursor to that.
Right.
Lovely. All right, Sydney, I'm going to ask you to shut off your video and we're going to consult. All right. Anyone ready to jump in? Jennifer? Did you unmute to, yeah.
Oh, yeah. This might have been for a probing question. I thought Sydney had mentioned something about a Maccabees song.
There is, I posted the link to it. The Maccabees did record a song to the words of Megillat Ta'atzmaut, and it's already on the discussion board where you posted your first ideas and where I added some material for you as well, Jen.
So I wonder, thank you. So I wonder if one of the exercises would be have the kids, I love Sydney's suggestion about doing it through, she was talking about putting things down and moving things around, but doing it through other methods, also like writing their own song or making an app or, doing, kind of differentiating, offer them a few different options.
Great. Sherry?
So one thing that I don't know how appropriate it would be in this exercise, but maybe the question, what do you feel is missing from this declaration? And if you were on the committee or on the task force and you were going to give your personal input about what you would like to see in the modern Declaration of Independence, what would you personally add and what would you subtract?
Yep. And I'm going to add in, because I think it's part of all this, I think she should think about how much time she wants to spend on this. It's such, to sort of, it's on the one hand, okay, I get it. It's a rotating elective and she has 4 weeks on Israel and maybe this is one of the weeks, but I would almost want her to give the document and the students dive into the document it's due, and let them, really study it, maybe do some comparison stuff, maybe do the, what Sherry just shared about, what's missing, what would you add, how would you do a contemporary one? And then, almost do a second week on some interpretive stuff where they get to do the, again, what I'm for shorthand calling the blackout poetry, or making a rap or making an app or whatever it is, but to not cut it short, especially, and Sydney, when she posted on the original discussion board, one of the reasons it motivated her was she felt she had never been introduced to this as a teen. So all the more so, like, let the teens feel that they own this thing, like not just sort of, okay, I got to study it for a half hour and then I went right into making some artwork on it. So just a thought. David.
I'm actually going to offer kind of the opposite take of the last two, in that I think there's strong value in clarifying what your committee means by engagement to Israel, because I think is the question, how does Israel view itself through the Declaration of Independence, or what's my connection to Israel through the Declaration of Independence? Because if advocacy is the outcome, or like setting students up to have massive gaps between where they think the Declaration should be and where it currently is. I don't know if that sets them up for success in advocacy, if that is the goal at the end of this.
Can I piggyback on that comment? So I was going to say something about that, that I mentioned to Sydney as well, about how you could have the kids looking at what's a statement of the past, what's a statement of the current situation, and what's aspirational for the future. And so Israel, as a nation that is still growing up, there's still lots to aspire to that hasn't been realized. And I think that that can also lead to active engagement. So like you guys did with the Rega Shel Yisrael through news, if you were incensed by the article and the events that happened at the Kotel for those B'nai Mitzvah who were disrupted, you might make as your project something supporting the Women of the Wall, for example, or getting involved in some way. So I think that we worry, I worry sometimes about all the ways that Israel falls short, but I think that one of our overall, Marian, correct me if I'm wrong, one of our overall goals would be to see the real Israel as having bumps and challenges along the way that may be yet to be addressed fully or achieved, but that we don't want to be cut off, as I know Sherry worries about in her community, where if you don't see that all the aspirational things have been accomplished as yet, that it becomes a turnoff that then puts you in an anti-position. Marian, maybe you want to say a little more about that?
Yeah, so I'm thinking again, like the sort of the striation, like what belongs in our final project and what belongs in your work as an educator in your institution. And so I think it struck both Susie and I when early on in the semester when Sydney posted her institution's mission statement, because there is a huge challenge of an institution. If an institution thinks that the ultimate goal is to have people advocate, what does that really mean? And and then what does it mean to us as educators? How do you teach people to advocate if you're not teaching them content, So that's a big challenge. So I would just say that for the purpose of the final project, bringing the Megillat Tatzmut as a primary source is a brilliant thing. And for the purpose of then Sydney bumping it up to her mission statement to possibly pose those questions in her final paper of what do I do with this document that may open up a pathway that doesn't necessarily want us to advocate positively, but what my synagogue thinks of as advocacy. For the purpose of the paper, this is a great place to struggle with that question. And what does it mean? And how do I use this document to do that? And I look forward to Sydney writing about that. And I think that would be really, really valuable. I think in terms of what she does in her work, and Sherry, obviously this goes for you too, it goes for all of us, how do we then navigate inside our workplaces when what we want to teach, what we think is the right thing to teach to get to the quote unquote, the correct outcomes is not necessarily aligned with what our bosses think. And even in the case of most synagogues, whoever wrote that mission statement may be long gone from the board and is not really your boss anymore. And is not, it's very, very, very complex. But I think, again, for the purpose of the class and for the purpose of Sydney using this as an opportunity to wrestle with this, it's a great opportunity. If it wasn't, well, you all are going to be in classes together next semester, so we can continue the opportunity to share this a little bit. And maybe it's something we'll talk about. Susan and I were just talking today about orientation for the fall, and maybe that's something that we'll bring back up into the conversation. I want to get to Jen. Susie, thanks for bringing it up. David, thanks for bringing it up. Really important. Let's get to Jen, and then let's bring Sydney back, okay? Because it's already 4:36.
I'll be quick. When you're teaching a primary document like this, how much historical context do you need to give it? I guess it's my question. Like, if we're doing a 5-unit, 6-unit lesson, like, what on that timeline do you need to help the kids understand?
Great question. I mean, yeah. I mean, you got it. I mean, it's the question of like, how much time do you have? Where are the priorities? How much do you think is necessary for the students to have to not just feel like, where the hell did this come from and why are you bringing this to me, right? I can't answer for, al regel echad, right now, because it really is dependent on your setting, who your students are, etc. But it is the question. It really is the question. How do you bring a primary source? How do you help the students make sense of it without thinking you need to do 3 sessions of background history on, and that's part of the assignment for you guys to say like, okay, how do I bring this to my class? How do I bring it in my setting? What makes sense? So sorry if that's not satisfactory, but I think it's the honest answer. All right, let's let Sydney come back. And Sydney, just last comments.
Just thank you. This is really helpful. And I look forward to thinking about it further and implementing it in my project.
All right, I am respectful of the time, even though we're 8 minutes over. We're 3 minutes over the extra time. But I hope you all found this very interesting for each other in the conversation, but also interesting, of course, for your own work. As you all know, of course, Susie and I are always ready, willing, and able to talk with you about your final, any of the work. And we'll make appointments with you as necessary. And of course, Sherry, thank you for already reaching out about the incomplete. We are hoping everybody's on time and on target to be done a week from Friday with all the final, right, Susie? A week from Friday is the final submissions of everything.
Is the final submission of the project, but if you need to request the incomplete, that actually has to happen by tomorrow, basically, to make sure that that gets in on time for us to give our permission. We don't encourage that, but I will be creating a little mini checklist for each of you on things that I know that you're missing, and that may be helpful to you going forward. Again, we want you to be able to finish this and enjoy the rest of your summer. And we will talk to you, Sherry, about coming up with a date that's before the beginning of the new semester. And that's what we would want for any of you who do take an incomplete. So it's not weighing on your shoulders and taking away from your ability to learn what's going to be new in the fall semester.
When is the fall semester? When does that begin?
It's August 29th. So Susie, I think you're
It's not-
talking about, the next semester, you mean, the January
No,
semester.
No, well, officially, when you do, this is only if anybody wants to stay on for this. Officially, you can take till the end of the following semester, but sometimes we have asked people to try to do that before so that they're not carrying this as a burden. So that's something you're going to propose to me and Marion, and we will discuss it.
And
But-
the other, because I think personally, I mean, 10 days is,
It
I don't know.
doesn't seem like a lot of extra time, so I really don't know what you've got on the docket in the fall semester, Sherry.
So we don't have any academic classes in the fall except for the thesis, which we
Okay.
meet once a week, and then our field. But I do want to assure you, my goal, I don't want to even do this. I mean, I really don't want to do an incomplete, but I was, as I mentioned in my email, I don't want to blow through this because this is too important to me. And I just feel like, and because I'm already behind a unit, I just don't want to blow through and skim. I really want to get through the material well. And so, but I want to let you know, I don't want to drag this out. I don't
Okay.
want this. My goal is to get this done as quickly as possible. That's what I would like. So,
Okay, we'll talk about it. So, because I do
Sure.
want to say something about this to everybody else who's on, just to know that as Susie does her checklist, and I really, that this is not, I'm trying to do this to help you, that if, let's say, Susie, in the checklist, you're missing one thing from 3 units ago and 2 things from last week or whatever, if it's not 100 things or even 40 or 20, you're going to get, you will pass the class. So
Sure.
don't take an incomplete because you think you need to
Right.
finish, be
Every
perfect.
single thing, agreed, agreed. And any of you who have learned with me before, you know how that works. So no, the goal isn't to make you want to take it incomplete. It's just people sometimes say, oh, I didn't realize I was missing that. Thanks for letting me know. And then you take it into account. And I also want to say, prioritize your final project. So in terms of the gravity and the weight of different assignments, I want you to focus on your final project. And if you have to leave a couple of discussion boards unanswered, that is not going to, in a big way, adversely affect your grade. So don't want that to be the focus.
Yep, thank you. That was the message I wanted to get across. And so Sherry, I know you reached out about it, and yeah, I mean, let's figure out what's going to make sense and how you can prioritize getting the work done soon.
okay.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yep. All right, guys.
Can I
Good to
ask one
see.
quick question? Just because I'm actually planning on using this year. So is it okay to do like a 15-minute each session, each month about this, instead of just doing it with my school twinning group, to make sure that everyone is getting exposure to Israel and philanthropy?
So again, you have to decide what makes sense for the project, for the, this as a final paper. And then if it makes sense to align it with what you think makes sense for your students, then for sure. If it's not, if that's not the break point, then, figure it out. But as far as we're concerned, we want you to create something that makes sense in your setting, that gives the integrity to the primary source.
Yeah.
So, do we care if you do it as 15 minutes once a month, or do it as a one-shot whole day, or, we don't care. We want you to do something that makes sense for your setting.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay.
Because I think it solved a lot of my issues thinking about this project.
Okay.
So thank you.
All right. Are we good to go, everyone?
So one quick question about so is my primary source Hanok Piven, or should I something he's done?
Well, so that's what I was trying to push you on.
Right.
Alyssa, Susan, do you want to answer?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, that, like, if yes, or, I mean, either it's Hanoch Piven as an Israeli artist, that he's your primary source in his body of work, and then you can choose 5, 2, 1 piece that's the focal point. Or it's Hanoch Piven, an artist as an Israeli, his life story, his output. You have to write it in a way and explore it in a way that resonates for you. Okay, so if you want to say, I'm going to look at those 4 pictures, or whatever it was of Ben Gurion,
Whatever, Ben-Gurion.
of Ben Gurion, or I want to look at, I'm going to compare, I want to look at, he's done a lot of American presidents. I want to compare some Israeli prime ministers and his American, whatever, you choose what the it is. But just make sure it's not mediated in the sense that it's not a book about Hanoch. It's
Right.
Hanoch himself or his work itself, or. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
And you'll
Okay.
see the examples, the links I gave you would give you not just like Ben Gurion and other leaders, but the Moses one as an example. And then he goes through like dissecting it. So it's kind of a model of what you could do with students.
Okay. And again, when you're writing about that part of the paper, you may want to talk about like, and I think I put this on the discussion board, like where has his work been exhibited?
Yeah.
Who have been some of his clients? Like, because that's going to give you the sense of why is he an important, like what makes it resonant for us? Not just that we did a great workshop with him and it was really interesting, but what is it that, what's behind that he did a great, even, the fact that you jumped onto the, he doesn't consider himself an artist. Like that's a big piece. That's a really big piece. Okay.
Okay.
All right. I am going to close this. I'm going to remind Debbie to please post this as soon as possible so that you guys can refresh it. Okay. Refresh yourselves to what the conversations were.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank you
all.
so much.
Good to see you and be together.
A joy for us to be with you again in this learning mode.
For sure.
Yep.
Talk
All
to
right.
everybody later.
Bye.